You ever have one of those mornings where you're just trying to enjoy a quiet start to your day, maybe sip on some coffee, ease into the chaos of life, and then suddenly, bam, the universe decides that peace isn't on the menu. That was me, standing there in my kitchen, waiting for the coffee to finish brewing, when I heard the sound. And not just any sound. It was the unmistakable gut-twisting screech of metal grinding against concrete, followed by a blaring car horn that made me nearly spill the mug I hadn't even poured yet. My dog yelped and shot under the table like we were under attack. And honestly, for a split second I thought we were. I ran to the front door, heart pounding, dread in my chest like something terrible had just happened. And when I threw it open, there she was, in full suburban battle armor. Karen. Now, I didn't know her name was Karen at the time, but the universe makes these people easy to identify. Perfectly styled hair that hadn't moved since the early 2000s, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown, arms crossed in pure judgment, and that expression on her face like she'd just found out her favorite brunch spot was out of mimosas. Her oversized SUV, because of course it was jammed halfway across my front lawn, the front bumper practically making out with my flower bed like it owed it money. She was standing outside of it, not looking apologetic, not concerned, but absolutely livid, as if I had done something wrong. She pointed dramatically at the small wooden fence I'd installed just the day before. Nothing crazy, just something to mark the edge of my driveway, make it clear it was, mine. "You blocked the shortcut," she shrieked, her voice cracking like she couldn't believe what her eyes were seeing. "Do you know how long I've been using this driveway? Months. Now I have to go the long way around like everyone else." I just stood there, staring, trying to process what was happening. Like, was this real life? I should have been angry, but I was too stunned to feel anything except disbelief. My driveway, my property. And this woman was yelling at me like I'd installed a toll booth in front of her house. "Karen," I said, trying my absolute hardest to stay calm. "This isn't a public road. It's not a shortcut. It's my driveway. You can't just keep using it like it's yours." Her face twisted even more, like she had just taken a bite of something sour. She scoffed, flicking her hand in the air like I was a fly buzzing too close to her brunch. "That's ridiculous," she snapped. "The HOA allows it. Everyone in the neighborhood knows this is the quickest way out. Why are you being so difficult?" I almost laughed. Almost. Because in that moment, I realized what I was really dealing with. This wasn't just a neighbor with bad boundaries. This was a full-fledged entitlement queen, and I was now on her radar. I reminded her again, gently believe it or not, that the HOA didn't own my driveway, that I had the right to keep people from using it like a freeway exit. But she wasn't having it. She leaned in, dropped her voice to this fake sweet condescending whisper, like she was about to deliver some ancient neighborhood prophecy. "Listen, sweetheart," she said, and I swear my soul nearly left my body. "I've been living here for 15 years. This shortcut's been here longer than you. Just because you're new doesn't mean you get to change everything. This driveway has always been the shortcut. It always will be." I clenched my jaw so tight I thought my teeth might crack, because this wasn't the first time she'd pulled something like this. I had been watching her abuse my property for weeks, pretending she didn't see the cones I put out, nudging them out of the way like a raccoon in a trash can. One time I put up a small gate. Nothing fancy, just a physical barrier. She plowed it over with her car like it was a leaf on the road. I even got her on video, clear as day, driving straight through like she owned the place. Sent it to the HOA, thinking maybe, just maybe, someone would do something. Their response? A collective shrug. "Karen's been here forever," they said. "It's probably just a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding, right. And now here she was again, standing on my ruined lawn, demanding I remove a fence that was on my property, yelling at me for blocking a shortcut that never should have existed in the first place. Her SUV was still humming like a mechanical threat, the smell of burnt rubber in the air from where she'd slammed the brakes too late. And what really stuck with me, what really got under my skin, was how she looked at me like I was less than. Like I had committed the crime of being new, of not understanding the sacred suburban hierarchy where Karen reigned supreme. It wasn't about the shortcut. It was never about the shortcut. It was about control. And I had just dared to challenge hers. She wasn't done. Not by a long shot. I could see it in her eyes as she yanked out her phone and said with a smirk, "I'm calling the HOA, they'll deal with this." I should have been worried. But instead, I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was war. And I was just getting started. The email came that afternoon and I knew, before I even opened it, that it wasn't going to be good news. Subject line, notice of violation, HOA concern. My stomach dropped. I clicked it open and there it was, plain as day, in that cold, polite language that somehow always manages to feel more insulting than if they'd just come out and called me a troublemaker directly. Dear homeowner, we've received complaints regarding unauthorized modifications to community access pathways. The recent fence installation on your property has been deemed disruptive to neighborhood traffic patterns. Please remove it immediately to maintain community harmony. I stared at the screen, blinking, barely able to believe what I was reading. Community access pathways? My driveway is now a community access point? I couldn't even process the rage at first. It was too absurd to be real. The fence they were talking about wasn't some giant steel wall with barbed wire. It was a small, tasteful wooden barrier, completely within my property line. I had checked. I had researched. I had even called the city zoning office to be sure before I built it. But the HOA didn't care. No, someone had complained. And by someone, I meant Karen, obviously. She must have sent in her complaint the second she got home from our little morning encounter. Still furious, she couldn't bulldoze her SUV through my yard anymore. And the HOA? They didn't investigate. They didn't ask questions. They just acted. Against me. Against the homeowner. Against the guy trying to protect his own land from being treated like a public highway. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I went straight to the HOA office to confront them. And when I walked in, there she was. Sitting in the lobby like she owned the place, chatting with one of the board members, sipping a drink like this was her personal country club. She gave me this smug little glance, barely hiding the glee on her face. I could tell she thought she had already won. The president of the HOA, Mr. Dunlap, a man whose entire personality seemed to be built around polo shirts and passive-aggressive sighs, barely looked up as he said, "Ah, Mr. Walker, we were just discussing your, landscaping choices." I didn't sit down. I didn't smile. I folded my arms and stared at him, heat buzzing behind my eyes. "You mean the fence I put up to stop Karen from illegally driving through my property?" The room went quiet. One of the board members coughed awkwardly. Karen, still seated off to the side, gave this light, condescending chuckle, like I was some child throwing a tantrum. "It's just that," one of them finally said. "Karen's been using that path for years. It's kind of a neighborhood tradition." And that's when I lost it. Not yelling, not throwing anything, but just internally. Because in what universe does someone's habitual trespassing get upgraded to neighborhood tradition? Was I supposed to roll out a red carpet every time she decided to cut through? I fired back, "Let me get this straight. You're saying that because Karen has been destroying my lawn and using my driveway without permission for a long time, I'm the one in the wrong for trying to stop it?" Another uncomfortable pause. Mr. Dunlap cleared his throat. "Well, technically no, but..." I didn't let him finish. "No buts. This is private property. I pay taxes on it. I mow it. I maintain it. It's not a shared space. So why exactly is the HOA trying to control it? Karen piped up then, her voice syrupy sweet with just a hint of venom. Oh, come on, it's just a little shortcut. Don't be so dramatic. I took a deep breath, forcing myself not to laugh. Because this woman didn't just want access to my driveway, she wanted power. She wanted to remind me that in this neighborhood, she was untouchable. And the HOA, they were her lapdogs. I realized then that I could spend the next year filing complaints, submitting documents, and arguing until I was blue in the face. It wouldn't change a thing. The board wasn't going to stand up to her. They weren't going to risk the wrath of Karen. So I walked out. Not defeated, not discouraged. Just determined. If they weren't going to help me fix this, I was going to fix it myself. But not with fences. Not with more complaints. No, I needed something bigger. Something better. Something that would send a message loud and clear. That night I sat on my porch, staring out at the ruts Karen's tires had left in my grass. And the idea started small. Just a thought, really. A hedge. A row of thick, dense hedges that she couldn't drive through. But then it grew. What if I didn't just block her? What if I confused her? What if I built something so petty, so needlessly elaborate, so absolutely maddening, that it would drive her crazy every time she tried to step foot on my land? That's when the plan really clicked. I wouldn't just stop her from using my driveway. I'd turn it into a puzzle she could never solve. A hedge maze, a real one, full of dead ends and loops and frustration. If she was going to treat my property like her personal racetrack, then it was time to introduce a few obstacles. I stayed up late that night sketching out ideas, twists, turns, fake exits. I wanted her trapped. Not physically, but mentally. Lost, defeated. I wanted her to get out of her car, walk 5 steps in, and forget why she even came in the first place. The next morning, I started making calls, and when I found the right landscaper, the one who actually chuckled and said, "You're serious?" That's the most hilariously petty thing I've ever heard. I knew I had my guy. We started planning immediately. Fast-growing hedges, dense, sharp, nearly impossible to push through. It would look like a beautiful, elaborate piece of landscaping. But underneath, it would be my final move in the game Karen had started. And this time, I wasn't playing to defend. I was playing to win. Finding the landscaper who would take on my idea wasn't easy. Most of them thought I was joking. One guy even hung up after laughing and saying, "Okay, but seriously, what do you actually want?" But eventually I found him, Mark. Older guy, beard like a forest ranger, arms like tree trunks, and the kind of smirk that told me he wasn't just taking the job for the paycheck. He wanted to see how this played out. When I told him I didn't just want hedges to block the driveway, but a full-blown maze, complete with twists, loops, dead ends, and misleading paths, he paused, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "That might be the most gloriously petty project I've ever been asked to build. When do we start?" We didn't waste any time. The very next day, he and his team were out there, walking the perimeter, sketching out designs in the dirt, measuring angles, calculating how far the hedges needed to be spaced to grow thick and tall enough to create real barriers. This wasn't going to be some rinky-dink garden path with a few bushes. No, this was going to be a green fortress of confusion. And I was involved in every part of it. I spent hours going over the layout, making sure the main entrance was just misleading enough to look like a normal driveway. The first stretch of gravel would look untouched, almost inviting. But about 10 feet in, it would split into 2 directions. One would circle back around in a loop so perfectly designed, you'd think you were making progress when really, you were just going in circles. The other would lead to a dead end that looked like a throughway, until you were right up against the hedge, stuck between branches, and your own poor life choices. Mark and I got creative. We added narrow corridors with sharp turns, that made it impossible for larger vehicles to maneuver easily. A few paths looped you back to the very beginning without you even realizing it, until you were facing the same set of hedges you passed 10 minutes earlier. We even threw in a few decoy exits that led to nowhere, just for fun. He called it landscape architecture. I called it psychological warfare. Either way, it was shaping up to be a masterpiece. And we weren't just planting any random bushes. After a lot of research, we settled on Japanese boxwood. It grows fast, it grows thick, and once it's mature, it's like a living wall. You don't push through it. You don't peek over it. You respect it. Mark brought in dozens of them, all young but healthy, ready to take root and thrive. The first week was a blur of digging, planting, watering, mulching. Every day, I watched as my driveway transformed from a straight path into a slow-growing labyrinth, one row at a time. It was beautiful, really. The symmetry, the planning, the elegance of it all. From the street, it looked like a fancy garden upgrade. But hidden within it was pure chaos, at least for anyone who didn't know the layout. By the third day, the skeleton of the maze was complete. The plants were still young, so you could kind of see through them in places, but that was fine. I wanted Karen to see the maze. I wanted her to stare at it every time she drove by and wonder what the hell I had done. And sure enough, she noticed. That afternoon, I caught her SUV crawling past my house, moving slower than I'd ever seen it. Her window was down. She was staring out with narrowed eyes, probably trying to make sense of what she was looking at. She didn't stop. She didn't say anything. But I knew she was watching, plotting, waiting, probably assuming the HOA would come to her rescue again. Let her think that. Let her believe she had time. Meanwhile, I was laying the trap. By the end of the week, the maze was in full shape. It wasn't mature yet, but the structure was solid enough to confuse someone, especially if they didn't know where they were going. I added a little wooden sign at the entrance. Not too dramatic, just something subtle and poetic. It read, "Shortcut closed. Welcome to the Maze of Doom." A small joke, but a warning nonetheless. This was no longer a driveway. It was a challenge, a test, a very polite middle finger disguised as landscaping. And then came the moment I had been waiting for. It was a quiet Saturday morning, the kind where the world still fell asleep. I was inside, enjoying my first sip of coffee, when I heard the unmistakable hum of Karen's SUV. That engine had a very specific purr to it. Loud, confident, a little too proud for a vehicle that had probably spent more time parked outside yoga studios than off-roading. I didn't even have to look. I knew what was about to happen, and sure enough, after a long pause, I heard the soft crunch of gravel, the sound of tires rolling over my property. She was back. She was trying to use my driveway again. I could almost picture her behind the wheel, smirking, thinking she'd finally outlasted me. That the HOA had cracked down on me and I had caved. That the path was open again. But this time, instead of a straight shot to the exit, she was entering something far more complicated. The crunching of tires slowed, then stopped. Silence. I imagined her staring through her windshield, suddenly realizing that something wasn't quite right. The path didn't open up, it forked, and not in a way that made any logical sense. No signage, no obvious route, just green hedges that looked the same from every direction. She made her choice, probably took the right path, thinking that was always the correct answer. But that one led to a tight curve and a dead end that didn't look like a dead end until you were basically kissing the shrubs. Then came the backup, a little too fast, a little too frustrated. I heard the scrape of her tires against the gravel edge. She tried the other direction, another dead end, another turn, another reverse. I sipped my coffee slowly, savoring the moment. She was in it now, and she had no idea how bad it was going to get. Minutes passed. Then came the sound I hadn't heard in weeks. Her horn. One long, angry blast that practically echoed down the street, like she was yelling at the plants, as if that was going to change anything. I stifled a laugh, shaking my head. She could honk all she wanted. That maze wasn't moving. And then, as expected, she did the most Karen thing possible. She opened the door, got out of the SUV, and decided to finish the maze on foot. I leaned casually against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her stomp through the narrow paths in her ridiculous high-heeled boots, turning corners with that same energy of someone who just knows they're right up until they realize they're very, very wrong. She disappeared behind a hedge, reappeared, disappeared again, and after a few minutes, popped up in the exact same spot where she started. Her face was flushed. Her hair was a mess. Her rage, glorious. When she finally found her way out and locked eyes with me, I expected yelling, screaming, maybe another HOA email. But what I got instead was her storming up to me, finger jabbing the air, her voice low and venomous. "This is harassment." I smiled. "Karen, you drove into my hedge maze. That was your decision." Her eye twitched. She looked like she wanted to explode. And all I could think was, this was only the beginning. Because in a game of petty calculated revenge, she was outmatched, and I was just getting started. The HOA didn't even wait a full 24 hours before jumping back into the drama, and honestly, I was impressed by their speed. The next morning, there it was, a shiny new email in my inbox, almost glowing with passive-aggressive energy. The subject line read, "Urgent, landscaping concern escalation." I actually chuckled out loud before even opening it, because I already knew exactly who was behind it. Karen had clearly wasted no time after her little misadventure in the maze. She probably drove straight home, tore off those heels, poured herself a glass of lukewarm white wine, and immediately got to work typing the most dramatic complaint she could think of. And judging by the language in the email, she pulled out all the stops. "Dear homeowner," it began, already off to a great start. "It has come to our attention that your newly installed hedge structure is impeding community flow and may present a potential hazard for residents and emergency vehicles. As per HOA guidelines, obstructions that interfere with communal movement or access may be subject to removal." I read it 3 times, mostly because I couldn't believe how ridiculous it sounded. Community flow? My driveway wasn't a public park. Emergency vehicles. What? Was Karen going to claim that a fire truck needed to get to her house and my hedge maze delayed them? If anything, she was the hazard. A shortcut hazard with an inflated sense of entitlement. But instead of getting angry, I smiled, because I had prepared for this exact scenario. The moment I decided to build the maze, I knew she'd try to spin it into some kind of neighborhood crisis. So I opened up the folder I had stashed on my desk. Yes, an actual folder, and pulled out every document I had meticulously collected. Local zoning laws, landscaping ordinances, property boundary surveys, and, the pièce de résistance, a letter from a real attorney confirming that the hedge maze was both decorative and legal. I fired off a response with all of it attached. No sarcasm, no emotion, just facts. Cold, hard, HOA-proof facts. "Dear HOA," I wrote, "thank you for your concern. Please be advised that the hedge maze in question is located entirely within the bounds of my private property, adheres to all local regulations, and qualifies as decorative landscaping under municipal code. There is no infringement upon public or communal property. Therefore, I kindly ask that all further concerns be directed toward actual violations. Warm regards." I hit send and leaned back in my chair, grinning, because the HOA couldn't touch this. Karen might have had them wrapped around her finger in the past, But this time, she'd overplayed her hand. And I was holding the winning cards. That afternoon, while I was out trimming a few of the hedges and adjusting some of the decorative stones I'd placed along the entrance, I felt it, that unmistakable presence, like a thunderstorm on the horizon. I turned, and there she was, standing at the edge of her driveway, arms crossed, sunglasses on, even though the sun was behind a cloud, and that scowl on her face like she had just tasted something bitter. She was watching me, not speaking, not moving, just glaring. I didn't acknowledge her. I didn't wave. I just kept trimming, casually whistling a tune. But I could feel her anger radiating across the street like heat off asphalt. Then, as if scripted by a suburban drama series, she marched across the street, heels clicking with purpose. She stopped just short of my lawn and said, "You think you're clever, don't you?" I looked up, smiled politely, and said, "I do, actually. Thanks for noticing." Her nostrils flared. "The HOA is going to make you tear that ridiculous maze down. You can't block off the neighborhood like this." I shrugged. "It's not the neighborhood I'm blocking. It's you. And the only thing ridiculous is the idea that my property is somehow a public highway." She took a breath, clearly trying to compose herself, and then changed tactics. "Look," she said, trying to soften her tone, "I don't want to fight, but you have to admit you're making things harder for everyone. That shortcut's been there for years. People depend on it." I tilted my head, pretending to think. People? Or just one very loud person with an inflated sense of entitlement? She scowled. "You have no idea how many people use that shortcut." I gestured to the street behind her. "You're right. Where is the angry mob? Where are the pitchforks? All I see is you." Her mouth opened, then shut, then opened again like she was buffering. And then, without another word, she turned and stormed back to her house, her heels stabbing the pavement with every furious step. I thought that would be the end of it. I figured maybe, just maybe, the message had finally gotten through. But of course, I had forgotten the most important rule of dealing with a Karen. They don't go down quietly. The next morning, I saw her again, standing at the entrance to the maze, and this time she had tools. A pair of oversized garden shears in one hand, and the kind of expression that said she'd spent all night convincing herself that she was the hero in this story. She looked like she was about to channel her inner action movie star and hack her way through my hedges like she was lost in the Amazon. I was already outside, watering some of the shrubs, and when I saw her walk up like she meant business, I set the hose down and called out, "Karen, before you start a massacre, you might want to double-check the neighborhood rules on damaging someone else's property." She froze, not because she didn't believe me, but because there was just enough hesitation to make her wonder if I was right. Her grip on the shears tightened. "This is an obstruction," she hissed. "I have every right." "Wrong," I interrupted, stepping a little closer. "That's destruction of private property. Pretty sure that's illegal." We stood there in silence for a beat. Then, with a growl of frustration that could have come straight out of a cartoon villain, she turned and stormed back to her house, muttering something about me being immature. But she wasn't done. Of course she wasn't. Later that evening, just as I was getting comfortable for a quiet night, I saw the red and blue flash of police lights reflecting off my windows. I sighed, because I knew exactly what was coming next. And sure enough, when I stepped outside, there she was, standing beside two bewildered officers with her arms crossed, and that familiar smirk creeping across her face. "Officers," she said sweetly. "Thank you for coming. I'd like to report an obstruction of community access." One of the officers looked at me, then at her, then back at me. "Sir, what's going on here?" I pointed toward the hedge maze. "That's my driveway. Karen here used to drive through it like it was a freeway, so I made some landscaping adjustments to stop her." The other officer blinked. You built a hedge maze. Correct. They exchanged glances. Ma'am, one of them said slowly, is this hedge maze on his property? Karen scoffed. That's not the point. It's causing a disturbance. He's making it impossible for me to use the shortcut. The officer pinched the bridge of his nose. Ma'am, do you have a legal right to use his driveway? She opened her mouth, then closed it again, caught mid-lie. No, I answered for her, smiling. She doesn't. The officers nodded, clearly over it. Then there's no crime here. It's his land. He can landscape it however he wants. Karen sputtered. But it's childish. He's doing this just to spite me. One of the officers sighed. Ma'am, being petty isn't a crime. And with that, it was over. She crossed her arms, let out an exaggerated huff, and stormed back into her house without another word. I walked back inside, flopped onto the couch, and let out a long, satisfied breath. The hedge maze had worked perfectly. It wasn't just a physical barrier. It was a mental one. A symbol. A statement. And for Karen, it had become a personal prison made of shrubs and her own pride. I knew she wasn't done. Not by a long shot. But whatever her next move was, I was ready. Because the more she fought, the deeper she dug herself into a hole she'd never climb out of. And I had all the time in the world to watch it happen. 2 days. That's how long Karen lasted after the police incident. 2 full days of silence. No emails. No passive-aggressive glares across the street. No HOA letters slipped into my mailbox. Just peaceful, uninterrupted quiet. I'd be lying if I said it wasn't unnerving. It was like the eye of a storm had moved over the neighborhood, and I knew the other side of it was still coming. Karen didn't strike me as the type to take a loss and retreat gracefully into suburban obscurity. No, she was regrouping, plotting. And sure enough, I was right. I was trimming some of the outer hedges that afternoon, just doing basic upkeep, when I heard the rumble of a truck. Not just any truck. This one was big, loud, the kind contractors use when they mean business. I looked up and there it was, pulling up in front of my house. Out jumped 2 guys in work boots, hauling equipment out of the back like they were gearing up for demolition day. And then, right behind them, emerged Karen. Striding down her driveway like a general marching into battle, sunglasses on, clipboard in hand, and the smuggest look I've ever seen on a human face. She didn't say hello, didn't explain, just waved her hand like a queen commanding her troops. Go ahead, boys, she said. That's the mess you're here to clear out. One of the landscapers paused, looking confused. Ma'am, are you the property owner? That flicker of panic in her eyes was brief, but I caught it. I'm on the HOA board, she snapped. I authorized this. The landscaper blinked, glanced at me, then back to her. Yeah. But are you the owner? Because we can't do anything unless the person who owns the property gives us permission. Karen looked like she was about to choke. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. I stepped forward, nice and calm, and said, That'd be me. I'm the owner. And no, you don't have permission. The workers looked relieved. I think they knew from the moment they stepped out that this wasn't going to be a normal job. They quietly packed their tools back into the truck, while Karen stood there, seething. This is harassment, she hissed, clenching her fists like she was holding back the urge to throw something. You're interfering with HOA orders. I smiled. Funny you mention that, because if you or anyone from the HOA touches a single branch of that maze, I'll have you all up for trespassing, destruction of private property, and harassment. You've pushed far enough. Now push again, and we're going to court. That was the first time I saw her hesitate. Real hesitation. Not the performative kind she used during her HOA speeches, or passive-aggressive confrontations, but the kind that said she was actually afraid. She stood there for a few more seconds, nostrils flaring, then stormed back to her house like a hurricane wrapped in khakis and floral perfume. The truck pulled away, and the neighborhood went quiet again. But I knew it wasn't over. It never is with people like her. That night, I stayed up later than usual. Couldn't sleep. I had this gnawing feeling in my gut. Call it instinct, call it paranoia, but I just knew she wasn't done. And right around 2:30 in the morning, that feeling was proven right. I was dozing off when I heard a soft snap, then another. Not loud, not even immediately alarming, but wrong. I slipped out of bed and checked the security feed. What I saw made me laugh, like an actual full belly laugh, the kind that catches you off guard. Karen, in full black attire, hoodie, gloves, flashlight between her teeth like some suburban ninja, and in her hands, garden shears, heavy-duty ones. She was moving through the maze, clipping away, hacking branches like she was trying to win some kind of hedge-cutting competition. I watched her make her way deeper and deeper into the maze, completely confident, clearly believing this was her grand victory moment. What she didn't realize was that every branch she cut just made it harder to find her way back out. She was turning a confusing maze into a chaotic mess of dead ends and false paths, like someone scrambling a puzzle mid-solve. I didn't rush outside. I gave it time. Let her get deeper. Let her panic a little. Eventually, I slipped on a jacket and headed out, walking calmly through the maze, listening to the sounds of her growing frustration. Snapping branches, swearing under her breath. The occasional grunt when she realized a turn led nowhere. When I finally caught up to her, she was standing in a small clearing, hair frizzy, sweat dripping down her face, and she looked like she'd been trapped in there for hours. I leaned against the hedge and said, "Enjoying yourself?" She spun around so fast, she nearly dropped the shears. "You tricked me," she shouted, her voice ragged. You set me up." I raised an eyebrow. "Karen, you broke onto my property at 2 a.m. with a pair of blades and started cutting your way through my landscaping. That's not a trick. That's a felony." She pointed at me, wild-eyed. "You forced me to do this. You left me no choice. That shortcut has existed since before you even moved in." I didn't even bother responding to the logic of that. There was none. Just pure, unfiltered entitlement. I pulled out my phone. "We're done here," I said. "You're trespassing. I've got you on video. I'd offer you a way out, but... well, I guess that's kind of the whole point, isn't it?" Her face went pale, then red, then pale again. She looked around, realizing how deep she'd gone, how far from the entrance she'd wandered, and how much of the maze she'd ruined. She tried to run, took off down a path, wrong turn, another, then doubled back, only to find herself staring at the same stretch she'd just passed. The branches she'd hacked through had created false exits and new barriers. She was literally lost in her own destruction. I followed slowly, not in a rush, listening to her footsteps pounding the gravel, the muttered curses growing louder and more desperate. Finally, after what must have felt like an eternity to her, she stumbled out of the maze and collapsed onto my driveway, gasping for breath like she'd just escaped a jungle. I walked up behind her, calm as ever, and said, "So, should I call the cops, or would you prefer to do it yourself?" She didn't answer, just lay there, staring up at the night sky like it had betrayed her. But I made the call. When the police arrived, she did her best to spin it, claimed she'd gotten confused and accidentally wandered in, said she didn't mean to cut anything. But the footage told a very different story. The officers reviewed it in silence, then turned to her and said the words I had been waiting to hear for weeks. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for trespassing and property damage." Her jaw dropped. "You can't be serious." One of the officers sighed. You were caught cutting through someone's hedges at 2:30 in the morning. We're very serious. They cuffed her and put her in the back of the squad car, and as they drove away, I leaned against my porch and let out a long, satisfied exhale. The war was over, and I had won. But the aftermath? Oh, that was even sweeter. The HOA, now publicly embarrassed by the entire ordeal, scrambled to distance themselves from her. I imagine they had a very awkward emergency meeting without her, because by the end of the week, she had been quietly removed from the board. No announcement, no explanation. Just gone. Her reign of neighborhood terror. Over. Her smug, entitled strut, replaced with careful, avoidant shuffles anytime she had to walk past my property. And as for my hedge maze, it became a local sensation. What started as revenge turned into a point of pride. Kids started playing in it after school. Parents brought their toddlers over just to walk the outer paths. Some neighbors even asked if I could help them design their own backyard mazes. It became my legacy, a symbol of standing your ground when the system fails you. And when Halloween rolled around, oh man, it became something else entirely. I transformed that maze into a haunted labyrinth, fog machines, creepy sound effects, hidden actors in costumes. We had glowing eyes peeking out from the hedges, motion sensor screams, even a fake graveyard near the center. The neighborhood loved it. We had lines of kids waiting to go through. People drove in from a few streets over just to check it out. My house went from that guy who blocked the shortcut to the coolest stop on Halloween night. Meanwhile, Karen stayed quiet, didn't come out, didn't participate, just peeked through her blinds and watched the world move on without her. And then came the twist I never expected. One night, long after Halloween had passed, after the last leaf had fallen and the neighborhood had gone quiet for the evening, I was sitting on my porch, sipping something warm, when I saw her. Karen, standing at the entrance to the hedge maze. Just standing, not yelling, not holding clippers, just staring. At first I thought maybe she was going to try something again, but she didn't. She stood there for almost a full minute, and then, slowly, quietly, she took a step forward, into the maze. I watched her disappear into the hedges. 5 minutes passed, then 10. No sign of her. But then, from somewhere deep inside, I heard it. That same sound from all those weeks ago. A low, frustrated groan. A muttered curse. The sound of someone who had once ruled the neighborhood, getting lost in the maze she tried so hard to destroy. I smiled, leaned back in my chair, and turned off the porch light. Some people never learn. And some victories, they just keep on giving.